What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with a little round 2 preview for the Zozo Championship. Gonna go through what to expect from this carnage-filled round, both from the DFS and from the prop perspective, and to go through any of your questions down in chat. So first off, welcome on in, everybody. It's the first time we've done one of these streams for quite some time, so stoked to be back at it. But also, right, welcome on in, right? Say hi when you guys get down here into chat and let me know if there's anything on your mind that you want to ask in terms of a question. But without further ado, let's start it off with the aforementioned wind, which is going to be pretty much the huge talking point here, right? It's why most of you are tuning into this live stream. You may have heard on the broadcast yesterday, you may have seen some of the forecast for yourselves, or of course the stream from Wednesday, right? Where we talked about what we are going to see today, but it's nasty, nasty wind. You have about 20 to 30 mile an hour sustained winds for much of the day. They'll be teeing off right around 9 local time. So by the time they're teeing off, the sustained winds are already close to 20 miles an hour. And you can see down there in purple, which is not typically a color that we see on these weather forecasts, you've got nearly 40 mile an hour wind gusts. So round 1 already played pretty hard, right? Already played just marginally under par. You're going to see that scoring average well over par today. I'd imagine probably right around a stroke over. So the golf course is going to look a lot different from day to day. And of course, you know, whether you're playing on DFS or over there on the prop side, is going to have a huge impact on how you attack the slate. So it's not just this ECM forecast. Pretty much all the 5, actually, I think there's 4 forecasts that we have over here in Europe. They all pretty much agree, right? Mid-20s when it comes to your sustained winds, and then pretty much close to 40 miles an hour on all 4 models. This Icon model, same thing as ECM. This Medio Blue model, same crap, right? All of them are calling for nasty conditions out there. And in the past, we've seen this, right? Pebble Beach comes to mind, a few other nasty events over the last 6 months or so. The tour likes to take it easy, right, on these tour players. They don't like to go out there and completely screw them, right? They don't like to, you know, embarrass them, right, in front of the international crowd, which is why I mentioned like a 1 over par scoring average, because in the past, I've heard people say like, oh, it's going to play like 2, 3 over par, right? If it's really blowing that much, it never gets that bad, right? You'll see that on the DP World Tour, sometimes at major championships from time to time, where a golf course will get out of hand, right? You'll see an average of like 3, 4 over, but on the PGA Tour, they do everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen. And the last time I can remember where people were calling for that kind of scoring average was the last round of the Genesis Scottish. So it was like the week before the Open Championship. I thought you might see like a 2.5 over par scoring average. I think it played like 1 over par that day. So again, they do pretty much anything they can to soften up the golf course, and I would expect to see that in action today, whether it's shortened tee boxes, whether it's easier pin locations, which just looking at the pin sheet earlier, it definitely looks like it's a little bit softer here for round 2. So just know that it'll play harder for sure, right? Don't get me wrong. It's not going to play easier than round 1, but I don't think it's going to get out of hand, right? That's the key there. I do think it'll be about a 1 over par scoring average. So with that being said, when we're looking at DFS plays, we're not looking for that same kind of ceiling round, right? You're not going to see like 5, 6 under par rounds today. A true ceiling round here in round 2 is probably going to be like 3, maybe 4 under par. So when you're looking at some of the projected points on my sheet, if you guys are a part of the Patreon, you'll see that my highest projections are right around the 40-point mark, right? Whereas it's usually, actually, I think it might even be like 38, 39 points for an apex on my projections, whereas that's typically closer to like a 48.5, 49-point projection. So there are going to be less points scored today, right? It's going to take less to take down a GPP. So just know that you don't have to have the absolute nuts to probably win, right? You're probably going to be able to win with a worse lineup than you typically would be able to, just because of the kind of scoring that we'll see out there. So let me bring up my projections. We'll talk through some of the chalk. That's the main thing I want to focus on here. And then all of your questions. So if you have any specific plays that you want my take on, whether I'm playing them or not, so on and so forth, just go ahead and let me know. But what we're going to focus on for the sake of the live stream here is kind of going tier by tier and looking at ownership. Because if you've played Showdown before, right, if you're a seasoned PGA DFS player in general, when it comes to a single round sample, it is all about the ownership, right? Round 4 Showdown, it's a little bit more nuanced because of placement points. But for rounds 1 through 3, where it's just all about pure scoring metrics for 18 holes, you want to take advantage of game theory. That's how you go out there. You're a plus EV player when it comes to Showdown, because and in an 18-hole sample, this is the whole point here, okay? Somebody like Xander Schauffele, who is like by far the best player in this field, he projects better for sure, right, than let's say a Kevin Yu down here, right, at $6,700. But that difference is like 7 fantasy points, right? It's like a birdie or 2 difference when it's all said and done, which matters. But when you look at some of the winning scores, some of just the optimal performances for Showdown, a lot of times it's like 5 or 6 players from the 7K range. Now, that doesn't mean you're only going to play guys down here in the 7K range. But the point is that for an 18-hole sample, pretty much anyone's capable of popping, right? So if up top you have guys that are like 30, 40% owned, like you'll have for round 4 Showdown, they're like almost automatic fades, right? Because almost everyone in the field has like the same chance of getting there, right? I don't want to say the same, right? Like I said, Xander is still more likely to succeed, but he's not 4 or 5 times more likely than some of the other guys in the 7K range. So it's almost always the best way to go out there and take a game theory approach, which is the kind of strategy that I take for Showdowns in rounds 1 through 3. And it's a hybrid approach of that and then taking some chalk out there for round 4. But like I said, it's a little bit different for Sunday when you have the placement points. But with that being said, Morikawa going to be mega chalky right after that performance. I have him at 26.6%, but just know that in larger field or higher dollar contest, he might actually be like 30, 35%. And sorry, I didn't mean larger field contest. Sorry, smaller contest will probably be like 30, 35% owned. And the higher dollar stuff as well, he'll fit that same kind of trend. Down here in the 9K range, you've got some chalk on like Keegan Bradley, Cameron Davis, right? 20% owned, but nothing that's really out of hand, right? I'd say Eric Cole in the 8K range is significantly higher owned, right, than most of the other guys around him. You could say the same thing with Nikolai Hogard, but outside of that, right, it's a lot of like 9, 10% owned players. So as long as you're avoiding some of these like mega chalky options, you're going to be just fine when it comes to your leverage. Even if you want to take, 1, maybe 2 chalky guys up here in the 9 and 10K range, as long as you're taking some sort of pivots down in the 8, 7K range, which we're going to go through here in just a second, you're just fine, right? You can take a few chalky pieces up top. In fact, I think of the players that are 10% plus owned in the player pool, I think only one of them is below $9,000. And that's Joel Damon. I'll just let you know, it's Joel Damon down there at like $7,100 that I'm playing because he's damn good in the wind and he has a legit sample of being really good in windy conditions. So that's why I'm playing Joel Damon down low. But up top, right, if there's somebody that's 15, 20% plus owned that you want to play, maybe even like a Colin Morikawa, that's fine, right? You can pick your spots up top. Just make sure that you play them in like half your lineups, right? If you're looking to get leverage out there and differentiate with the rest of your spots, which speaking of, when you play Showdown, right, for 4-round stuff, 8, 7K chalk is egregious as it gets, but for Showdown, it's even more so, right? It's even more multiplied because down here in the 7K range, like I mentioned, there's just little to no difference between these players, right? They're just marginally, better than the others down here. And when you have somebody like Damon, right, you could argue he'd be, egregious chalk, right? He's 11% owned. Now, you might be able to get away with playing like one of those guys in your player pool, right? I have, my one sucker pick in my player pool with the Joel Damon. But if you find yourself only playing like a Damon, a Cage Lee, a Nick Taylor, Cameron Champ, for example, these guys that are like 12, 13% owned, well, if you're only on those sort of players, that's what you want to be avoiding, right? That's the kind of situation that's going to get you into trouble. As long as you're mixing in some of these guys that are like 6, maybe 4% owned, you're going to be just fine, right? That's where you're going to get your leverage. That's where your product ownership is going to get closer to what you're looking for out there, even if you have a Morikawa up top, which full transparency, I'm fading Morikawa, right? That guy is not the best at backing up a low round. He's also not very good in windy weather. So a few things I think that are working against Colin out there. But if you wanted to play him, right, all you have to do is go, okay, I think Michael Kim's going to have a day, right? He's 4% owned here. Mix him into a few lineups. You can go, okay, let's go with Callum Tran. I was going to say JJ Spawn at 11%, but let's go even more, leverage. Let's go with Callum Tran at just 6.4%. You mix in, let's say Tran, maybe mix in Michael Kim to a chalky lineup up top, and you're just fine, right? So I just wanted to go through some of the lineup construction stuff there, talk through, how you're going to get leverage to the field. Up top, if you want to get different, which I definitely am here, I don't want to make it seem like I'm playing all the chalk up top. In fact, I'm not playing the chalk. Up there in the 10K range for this slate. But if you wanted to, you could get away with it. What I like are some of the more pivot options, right? You got Hideki here. You got Ricky Fowler, who's known as a pretty good wind player that you can take. And on top of just looking at the game theory edge, we can also consider, skill set advantages. And for windy slates, I consider myself a little bit of a specialist on these kind of slates, because the more tuned in you are with the tour, the more of an absolute golf hardcore weirdo, right, you are, the better you're going to be at these kind of slates, because it's very specific information that you need to make some of these determinations. And it's not stuff that you can normally look at data for, right? A lot of it is just watching enough golf to know these things. And one thing is that Ricky Fowler from South Florida, also went to school out in Oklahoma, is very used to the wind. And if you look at some of the wind metrics, like Fantasy National has a tab where you can look at really windy conditions. He's one of the best players in the world under windy conditions. So it's good when we have the narrative and the stats kind of backing each other up. But there are a few guys in the player pool that fit that mold, right? Some of them, and with Ricky Fowler, it's because he's really good at manipulating his ball flight. He's also just used to playing in the wind. But like Victor Hovland, for example, just has a really heavy ball flight. He hits the ball relatively low as well. So he doesn't worry about the wind all that much. Joaquin Niemann is another really good player in the wind because he has one of the lowest apex heights in all of the PGA Tour. And of course, now he's on live, right? So it's not like we're watching Joaquin Niemann out there this week, but it's that kind of player, right, that has a distinct advantage. And, I'll give you the one here up top, but there are a few of them that fit that description. But Ricky Fowler is one of them, right? He's a wind player. You've seen it. He's proven it over the last 4 or 5 years. And it's not really a surprise given his upbringing and where he's played golf, right, for the last 8-10 years. So there are guys that fit that mold. Minwoo Lee, I'll give you another one, right? A DP World Tour player that's really good at hitting stingers. You know what's good when you have to hit into a 40-mile-an-hour gust? A stinger is really good, especially when it's on a shorter par 4 where it's going to be like 360. He could hit that stinger out there to wedge range and then hit a flighted wedge and make a few birdies. That's how you get to the optimal lineup today, right? By making maybe 4 or 5 birdies. And it's a micro edge, right? I know it's not like stats are going to tell you that Minwoo is good at hitting the stinger, but I can tell you that as somebody that, and I hate to say it, is that follows his social media. He posts stinger videos like every other day. In fact, there was one that came out like the day of the event, right, of Minwoo hitting just a piss missile stinger. Like that stuff matters, right? And that's how you're going to generate an edge out here for these win slates. It's tough. Not everyone can do that. I just have to say that, right? It's one for the hardcore golf fans. But if you know of players that fit that description, play them. They're going to be underutilized, right? Maybe Ricky Fowler gets blown out of proportion because that's a well-known wind player, but there are a ton of guys in the 7 and 8K range that I'm playing that are, especially that didn't play well round 1. There are a few of them, like Sam Stevens. I hate that I'm giving away all of these, but yeah, Sam Stevens, right? Another Oklahoma golfer, knows how to play in the wind, did not play very well in round 1. What's his price tag? What is he? $6,900, right? Shot +2. These are the guys that are going to break the slate, right? It's not to say that he's 100% going to get the job done, but he's unowned, right? He's $6,900. You throw enough of these guys into lineups and they're going to work. Austin Eckroat. I hate that I'm giving these all away, but I want to give you guys some of the goods here, right? I want you guys to go out there, have a day yourselves. If you want all of them, check out the Patreon, right? Everything that's blacked out, but pretty much everyone in my player pool is a wind player. That's my narrative that I went with, right? And I went absolutely ham on it. But Austin Eckroat, right? Another player that played his college golf, super windy Oklahoma. Big surprise that he's in my player pool, right? Those are the kinds of guys that you want to keep an eye on, in my opinion. And it's tough if you don't have the information. Currently in New Orleans, unfortunately, DFS is not legal. Hey, you can do outright betting, though. So there you go. Thoughts on Hogard? He's another DP World Tour player that I could see playing well. The unfortunate part with Hogard, right, is the ownership, right? He's super chalky because he played well in round 1. That's not an issue if you're going to pivot elsewhere, right? If you have, a 7K, a 6K golfer that you're going to take as differentiation, then take Hogard. That's just fine, right? So he's a good play. I like the wind aspect for these DP World Tour guys, but just with the caveat that he's chalky, right? Handle that with the rest of your lineup there if you're going to take Hogard. Had the X-Man and Sanjay outright. How are they playing the wind? X-Man, decent wind player. Sanjay, he has good finishes when it comes to wind, right? Like Honda Classic is notorious for being one of the windiest events all year. He won at a pretty windy PGA National as well back there like 4 years ago. So I don't think he's horrible in the wind, but the metrics aren't as favorable on Xander and Sanjay as like a Ricky Fowler, for example. So I don't know. It makes sense. Like Sanjay hits a pretty low ball. He hits a really straight ball too. One thing that I hate giving all these away, but no, not everyone's going to know this shit. So it's not like you guys are going to be able to pick out the players anyways. And I say that, guys, because I'm playing against you in GPPs, right? I don't want to give away all my secrets out here, but low spin players are really good in the wind too, right? Because when you hit a ball with spin, if you're a golfer, you know this, right? And it's windy out, it exacerbates that spin. It's why when you're playing in windy conditions, you miss more greens, right? Because your misses are exacerbated. Somebody like Sanjay M, who's one of the lowest spin players in the world, that's why he's pretty good in the wind. That's why I think he's played so well at PGA National, right? And that's why I like these slates, guys. Is I'm a super big golf nerd. I'm also an engineer by trade, big physics guy. So I like these wind conversations because it gets all that creative juices going that I haven't used since after graduation. They're like 5-6 years ago. I went like directly into sports betting after engineering. Went engineering for a little bit, then went into sports betting and never looked back. But definitely still enjoy all that. Any Japanese golfers? Yeah, dude, in general, Samuel, they're low spin players, right? They're all very straight. A lot of the Japanese golf courses have OB on almost every single hole. So this is something that not a lot of people know about Japanese golf. Almost all the events that they play on the Japan tour have OB like 5-6 yards off of every single fairway. Japanese golf is just played differently than in America. When you miss fairways over there in Japan, if it's not like a 3-4 yard miss, they're literally making you hit another tee shot. That's how they handle it on most Japanese golf courses. Obviously not at Narashino, right? That's not the case for this golf tournament. But if you look at any of those Japan Tour players, they're all superstars, right? Anyone in this field that's Japanese and plays on the Japan Tour is a superstar from that tour. You can bet your ass that they hit the ball straight. I would say the only one that maybe doesn't is Kita Nakajima, because he's more of like your traditional like athletic build kind of player. Like he's the young gun, right? That's coming out. But if you want any of those like veteran Japan Tour players, they're going to be good in the wind. In fact, Sam, I don't have a lot of them in my player pool. And now that you mentioned it, I'm 100% going to go back and add some. So yeah, I think that's sharp. And it's because they're low spin players, because they have to be. They have to worry about the accuracy off the tee and their swings, their play. If you look at the driving accuracy metrics, and the reason why I became super aware of this, by the way, is because of Live Golf. So Live Golf, if you guys aren't familiar, right, does a lot of collaboration with the Asian Tour, right? So not the Japan Tour, different tours, but similar style of golf courses. And a lot of the Asian Tour players, right, play on the Japan Tour, right? So there's a lot of crossover there. And on the Live Tour, all of the Asian Tour guys are like 80% driving accuracy. Like Prachara Kongwat Mai was a guy who plays over there from time to time. He's a filler now. He plays every once in a while on the Live Tour. Hits like every fairway. There was another guy. He played in the Open Championship. Right, he finished in like the top 10. I forget his name off the top of my head. He's another guy who hits like 85% of fairways. It's because they have to hit the ball straight. They have to be low spin players. And in wind, that's probably a really good thing. I don't want to say like 100%, but it probably is a really good thing. So let's go through a few of the 7K guys. So we talked about like the Cam Champ chalk. He hits the ball really high. I have to say he can inflate his driver though. So I think he'll drive the ball really well. I'm not stoked about his like wedge game out there in windy conditions. I like the fact that Joel Damon hits a low ball flight both off the tee and with his irons. So unlike Cameron Champ, right, who really only hits the ball low off the tee, right? Joel Damon, if you've ever seen him hit wedge shots, sometimes he only hits them like 20, 30 feet off the ground. He has that super spinner, especially from like 70, 80 yards, right? Rather than just launching them into the air like a Rory, for example. And no wonder Rory's dog shit with his wedges, right? Joel Damon he hits that knockdown little wedge, little spinner, a little skipper, right? It'll skip once or twice and then stop. That's what you want in windy conditions. And again, I hate giving away all the nuts for today, but those are the kind of players that you want. Taylor Moore, another good wind player. Just a low ball flight, used to windy conditions down here in South Florida, won at a windy Valspar championship. So has shown that in the past. You can say the same thing about Davis Riley, another player that has decent wind metrics, but on top of that, has the experience being from the South, right? When you're from the South, you play in the wind. It's windy in South Florida. I would say Alabama, Mississippi, all those states, way more often than it's not, unlike a lot of the other parts of the country. Let's see anything else. Yeah, a lot of Japan Tour guys right down here in the 6K range that I think you could take. And if I was going to give you a few names, like Semakawa, probably not a bad idea. But in terms of the ones I know are like veterans, you could take Nagano. I know he's a really good putter too, so that's why he's popping in the modeling over there. Let's see, like Nakajima, you could play, but I feel like he's not that straight ball hitter that you're looking for. Yeah, I'd probably go Nagano, and then maybe like Ishikawa, maybe some Semakawa. Throw them in a few lineups down there, get the job done. Let's take a look at DraftKings. We'll go through some lineup construction stuff and then props afterwards. So if you have any questions about players, about DFS, let me know down in chat, and we'll get to it here in a second. I like Turan. So if I was going to play anything, like in terms of skill set, like if you were going to look at data and try and pick a player pool, which I think for a win slates is hard to do, but it would all be tee to green, because the more solid you hit the ball, the better ball striker you are, the better you are in wind. You've heard that from a lot of people. I can't tell you that from experience because I'm not a good ball striker. I don't play good in wind, but I've heard that before. And Martin is absolutely correct. It's Saddam Kakwanjana is the fairway finder. And it's like all of them. I think he's from Thailand. Right, so he's not Japanese, but he's from Thailand. It's the same thing. They all have these super tight golf courses where it's like OB off of every single hole. And I couldn't play it. I would shoot 150. So leaving more salary than usual, also the play, you could 100% do that, Sam. I don't think you have to force it in. The main reason being is that you're not going to have the nuts, the takedown or GPP. Off memory, I think the largest field GPP had like 9,000 entries, right, for today's slate. So even in that contest, you're probably going to have like just a good lineup to take it down, right? It's not going to have to be the perfect lineup. So I wouldn't leave too much salary, but you can if you want to. All right, so in terms of lineup construction stuff, kind of like I was just mentioning, I don't think you have to leave a ton of salary on the table, but you can if you want to, right? If you see yourself taking a bunch of chalk, like a Morikawa, let's throw Keegan in there, right? He'll be chalky. Let's throw Hogard in there, right? He'll be chalky. If you really want to start with like these three players who are like the three highest owned options at the top end of the board, you might want to leave salary on the table, right? This is the situation where, there would be a lot of utility in leaving that salary. But if you're starting with, a somewhat reasonable lineup when it comes to ownership, I feel like it's overkill, right? I feel like you don't have to do it. So like you could throw Nagano in there. You could throw Kevin Yu in there, right? And maybe you leave some salary on the table because you took three, super chalky players. I don't think you have to, right? Like, even if you're taking those three players, like how many people are going to play Nagano today? Like 1%. I mean, Kevin Yu is going to be like 6% owned or something like that. So it's like, you can get away with this, right? Especially if your last player, like even if you spend almost all your salary, if your last guy is a pivot, let's say it's like a Aaron Rye, for example, or maybe even a Shank, right? You shot +3. Both of them aren't super chalky. You could probably get away with that lineup. Like it's not my favorite lineup. Don't get me wrong. I hate Morikawa today. I hate a lot of the guys like Nico Hogard that we threw in there, but you could play it if you wanted to, is the point, I guess. Right? You have enough differentiation. You have enough leverage, with some of those lower tier options. And that's the power with not taking chalk down low. Now, if you were starting with like a Morikawa, let me throw Bradley and Hogard in there again. Like, don't play. Where's Joel Damon at? Where's Jolie? Is he cheaper than I thought? Yeah, he's $400. Sorry. So you wouldn't want to take Damon, right, if you started with these three players, because now you'd have 4 pieces of chalk in your lineup. You'd only have 2 spots to leverage. And unless you left salary on the table, right, this is the kind of lineup that could get you into trouble. So that's why I'm such a big proponent, right, of fading the chalk down there in the 6 and 7K range, because it frees you up with your 8, 9, and 10K options. Now, all you have to do to play a Damon, right, is take maybe a Keegan Bradley out and add a pivot in, right? So maybe instead of taking somebody like Keegan, who's going to be like 20% owned, you take a slightly lower owned Adam Scott. And maybe just to make sure you're not going to be super chalky, you also go from like a Hogard and then take like a Vincent Norman, right? Like you add in a few pivots. So there are ways to play the chalk. I just have to say it, like, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the chalk here for round 2, but I know a lot of people out there, right, have their plays, have guys they want to take there for Friday. If that's the case, just adapt the rest of your lineup. Right, take a few guys that are maybe suboptimal to get the kind of leverage that you're looking for. Outside of that, that's all I've got for DFS. And afterwards, we'll talk about a little bit of prop stuff. Is $700 too much to leave on the table? I think it's a little aggressive. If you're playing a real chalky lineup, then go for it. But if you're already contrarian, like, don't feel like you have to do that, right? Like, don't feel like you have to force in leaving salary on the table. If you end up on 6 players and you really like that combination of 6 players and it just happens to leave $700 on the table, like, that's fine. But don't feel like you have to leave that salary, if that makes sense. Do I always slim down my player pool? Absolutely. Yeah. I normally start off with like 30, maybe 35 guys that I want to play for Showdown. And that usually gets down to like 22 or less players. Sometimes less than 20 players that I'm taking for a Showdown slate in 150 lineups. All right, let's talk about some props. If you have DFS questions, I will still touch on them. No worries on that end. But yeah, with 40-mile-an-hour winds, a lot of fades that you'll want to consider. And the place to do it is on Underdog, right? They have the board priced a little bit lower than over there on Prize Picks. Like, for example, Bo Hostler, who I'd like for an over, is at 70.5 over there. And then Emiliano Grillo, he's at, I believe, 70.5 over there on Prize Picks. And he can shoot 70 and go under this, like, easily, right? He can make 4 birdies, I believe, and 4 bogeys and still go under this 21-point projection. I know 3 and 3 definitely goes under this 21.6-point projection, but anything over par, right? Like, he's projected at 70.5. On some books, he's up there at 71 strokes. He's 100% going to go under this projection if that happens. So I like that for Emiliano Grillo, where he played well in round 1. It's really tough to back up that kind of performance. Bo Hostler also shot -2 in round 1. And at the same time, they weren't playing in 40-mile-an-hour winds, right? They weren't dealing with by far the worst conditions that people are going to have all day. So I took the over on Hostler there, also the under on Emiliano Grillo. But over there on Prize Picks, which is what I want to bring up now, I'm handling it a little bit differently. So let me bring up Prize Picks and share that. There we go. Alrighty. So on Prize Picks, a little bit differently, I like some of the unders, and they have Xander Schauffele at 69.5 strokes. He's at 69 over there in Underdog. So that's why I said, like, I think that the Prize Picks board is a little bit better for the unders. He's at -165 on FanDuel for this, and he's -155 on DraftKings for this under at this mark. So huge plus EV play, right, if that's your kind of thing. But they also have guys like Ricky on here, Hideki at 70 strokes that are 69.5 on Sportsbook. So if you were going to take any unders, right, the place to do it is on Prize Picks, right? And there are a few unders that I took, and maybe even a few overs, right, on guys at 2.5 birdies on the board as well. So if you want all my exposure, right, I have a ton of fades in on Underdog. In fact, I have like 8 slips in at this point over there on the Underdog side. Check out my Patreon page, right? That's where I'm going to post all the exposure. But yeah, over here on Prize Picks, just to give you the one slip, let's go this under on Xander Schauffele. And yeah, I already told you guys about the Ricky and the Hideki ones. We'll go the under on Hideki Matsuyama, right? Decent value compared to the sports books. I have to say Hideki is juiced towards the over at 69.5. But given his track record, he's a decent wind player as well. We're guys that I were confident getting to. And that's half the reason I got to Ricky too, right? I mentioned him as a potential play at 70.5. I like him because he's a good wind player as well, right? He's proven that, and he has a decent track record around this golf course as well. That's all I've got here for the round 2 preview, though. We'll go through any questions down in chat. And yeah, we'll be doing the same thing for rounds 3 and 4. And I'll be at the Live event at some point this weekend. So if you're doing props over there for Live, if you're just watching in general, the team finales this weekend. So it's in my town, a little bit down the road. So I'm going to take a trip over that way. So we'll be watching some golf in person tomorrow. We'll have, a little bit of a night sweat here for round 2. And then football throughout the weekend, right? We got Thursday night football tonight. Then we got football for college and for NFL on Sunday. So just looking forward to all the action this weekend. Let's see what we got down there. So Tyler says, what do I think about Xander to beat Morikawa in a head-to-head matchup? I love it, right? Morikawa coming off the ceiling round, going to be tough to back that up. And you've got Xander, who projects the best of anyone in the field. So I'm all for that, man. That's a decent prop. And of course, I got you out there, boss. That's all I've got, though, for this stream, guys. Going to go out there, finish up my lineups here from round 2. But best of luck out there with those props and with any DFS entries that you're going with. And may you see the name towards the top of some of those GPPs.